Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to today's Enterprise Connect webinar, Maintain and Migrate, How On-Prem PBX and Cloud Calling Can Coexist. Sponsored by Continuent and broadcast by Informa. I'm Eric Kraft with Enterprise Connect, and I'll be your moderator today. Discussing today's topic is Diane Myers, Principal Analyst at Metrigy, and John Shelby, Vice President of Business Development at Continuent.
Great, thanks, Eric. As Eric mentioned, I'm Diane Myers. I'm the principal analyst over at Metrigy, and I'm going to really set us up for the discussion that we're going to have over the next hour. And if you're not familiar with Metrigy, we are a research analyst firm focusing on enterprise communications across the collaboration and customer experience realms. I'm going to share with you some research today that we did late last year around workplace collaboration, telephony aspects, and it really kind of just gives us some background and a good point of discussion. So when we think about enterprises, right, and what they're using for their telephony, it really kind of, it's not all, one size fits all these days. And while we definitely hear a lot, and we're going to talk about cloud calling, UCaaS, hosted PBX, whatever you want to call it these days, the reality is that we still have a number of companies who have and utilize on-premise PBXs, right? And so this is, the old standard, right, that we had for 20, 30, 40 years, and it still persists today. In the survey that we've done, you can see here the blue, right? That's where I'm still managing myself an on-premise PBX, and that's still, this is a global study. This is data based on worldwide, and so you can see here we still have 32% of our study respondents that are using on-prem. But if beyond that, if you look at the orange, which is 20, 21%, those are where I still have a dedicated platform, and it might be in the cloud and managed for us by a third-party provider, but that's still kind of a dedicated system. And so still a lot of folks that have not moved fully to that cloud-based, multi-tenant subscription-based service. So there's a lot of infrastructure out there that is still being maintained and managed. We are moving to the cloud. It is, we've had a lot of movement over the last 3 years, right? COVID and the pandemic and working from home absolutely kind of helped speed things up. But it's still, as you saw on the previous chart, this is the same set of people we interviewed. It's still, we have stuff on-prem, but it's movement, right? So we asked them, what are your future plans, right? If you are on-prem, what is your movement? And you can see here that for the folks that are doing an on-prem or kind of a dedicated hosted, they really don't expect to change. However, that's a little less than 50%, and others are kind of in that evaluation phase. So it's moving, right? And there's no denying that is kind of the future. But it's a process, right? It's not something that most can just easily flip a switch with, particularly on the calling aspects. And what does that landscape look like? So I really want to take a step back and think about kind of that PBX, right? Because and I'm not going to read through all of this, but I thought it was really great background that you can see that we've had a lot of vendor activity on the PBX space. Lots of acquisitions, a lot of companies, selling the business off, and then it gets acquired and it becomes part of a company, and then it gets sold off again into another realm. I think the Siemens Enterprise would be a great example, right? They spun off the Unify brand, it went to Atos, and now it's back at Mitel. And you have and you have multiple examples of this. And then you have some uncertainty, right? I mean, Avaya right now has just filed for their second Chapter 11 bankruptcy in the last few years. And so there's just a lot going on still, even though we have a smaller number of companies. And I kind of put the logos on here so you can see who kind of exists today, even though they may not have been what they existed 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But we have Cisco still in the mix, Avaya, as I mentioned. We have Mitel, which is doing some consolidation. We have NEC, Alcatel-Lucent Enterprise, NEC being, they all have presence here in North America, but still a little bit stronger in Asia, Alcatel-Lucent Enterprise, a little bit stronger in Europe. And then I put Sangoma in terms of all of the what we call open source, right? That's kind of around there. So we don't have, if you are a business that has gotten, or has had and been maintaining a PBX, you probably have something that falls in one of these buckets, or you have something that's come through an acquisition. So you have a system, right? And maybe it goes back to the Nortel days, right? And now you're under Avaya, but you're probably being run and managed by one of these, or not managed, but this is who your supplier is on record. In this regard. So lots of changes, continued changes, and some uncertainty. Well, what's driving the business, right? So, you have the sunken asset, you're paying some maintenance, you may be paying some support for those, but what's at the, so it's a sunken cost. But what are you really driving towards, right? When you're moving to UC as a service, and the number one reason we hear, and this is from that same study that we did, is all around cost savings. So there is some cost savings, but a lot of the cost savings really is around the features and new capabilities. It's also around bundling capabilities with single vendors, right? So you see things like maybe it's Microsoft or Cisco, where I have my meetings application and video and some collaboration. And now I think, oh, I'm going to save some costs because I'm going to bundle up my my telephony with those pieces. Better work from home support, right? So things that are on, things that are in the cloud are more accessible or more easily accessible when you are supporting, employees that are not just working from home, but working in lots of different locations. So some of the reasons there. And I didn't put a slide in here. Maybe I should have thought to do that. But there is, just as I showed you the slide that talked about how many, where we are with the on-prem vendors. The reality is that today there are still lots of different options to move to for UCaaS. There's, just here in North America, we have over 50 companies that you could probably find. But we want to talk a little bit around Microsoft Teams, because that is a lot of momentum. There is a lot of companies out there evaluating Microsoft. And so in looking to move off of on-prem, and a lot of the reasons what I just mentioned in terms of consolidating all the applications and the UI under one. So I thought it was really important to spend a little bit of time on the Microsoft Teams piece of it. And so if we ask the people, and this is actually this is a little bit more recent data from the other stuff. This is a study we did at the beginning of the year, of this year, and we asked companies who are actually in that plan that moving to UCaaS, and then when we found out how many people have Microsoft Teams, how much of that Teams base was planning to adopt Teams phone system, and 37% of companies who were already, Microsoft 365, were looking to move to the Teams this year, right? So, and so it's quite significant, or I should say this year and next year. So it's quite significant, right? So if I have Teams, and that's my basis, to really move that migration path through. And why, right? Why go to Teams phone for those Microsoft users? And it's really to provide a more integrated user experience, right? I talked to a large enterprise probably about a month ago who is actually on this path right now, right? They have a traditional PBX, they have a couple different meeting applications, they have different collaboration applications, but they're also big Microsoft users. And so this is their path, right, is to start moving to that. And it is to provide a single user experience, and that's what they're hearing from their employees. They have about 20,000 employees. It's a global company. And this is exactly the reason why they in the past have taken more of a best of breed approach, and that's worked fine. But that might require 4 or 5 different apps on a desktop for their employees, and the employees are really asking for and saying, look, we want to have to one user experience. We want to have one interface for everything, and maybe it won't be as perfect for maybe this one tool, but it's good enough. And that's exactly what we're seeing, particularly with the Microsoft base. But really, I think this is, we've got a lot of things going on. More and more people are working from home full time, and then maybe going into the office. So really providing a consistent, easy user experience is kind of critical. And how are businesses now connecting the PSTN, right? The voice connectivity. So I've got Teams phone, but how am I actually enabling that? And today, most of them are using direct routing, right? So that's a Microsoft term, right? So kind of bringing your own connectivity, bringing your own SIP to the Teams environment. And that is how most of them are doing that today. And most of them prefer to do it from a single global provider if they're, obviously if they're a global company. But in some cases, they're working with different providers across different regions. If you're not using direct routing, you could be using Operator Connect. You could be using the direct calling plans through Microsoft. And now we have some mobile phone plans also coming into the mix. So lots of different options, but it's not easy, right? Using direct routing is not a simple plug and play, flip the switch kind of activity. It requires a lot of work, and what we're finding is, whether it be work on the integration part and getting the session border controller up and running, working on the dial plans, just a lot of different pieces. We do see that most are looking towards managed services, system integrators to really help with that process. And this kind of leads into what does it mean, right, in terms of management, right? So, and this is not specific to Microsoft. This is really what we're finding in terms of a lot of complex environments out there. I may be getting management tools from a lot of different vendors, right? So vendors or UCaaS providers or SBC vendors. There's a lot of things out there, right? So I could be using tools that are provided from the vendor, I could be using network-based tools, and I could be using third-party tools. I put this up there because there's lots of options on how to manage really complex environments, particularly those environments where I am going to be maintaining some pieces on-prem, right? So we talked the on-prem PBX, but I'm also starting to migrate to the UCaaS. So really, I mean, if you're going to do it yourself, there's a lot of complexity, but there are tools out there. But I really want to talk, we're going to talk a little bit more about, how do you manage this? How do you set this up? Because it isn't easy, especially as we start to try to migrate into single platforms. But the reality is that most people will be operating multiple platforms for a while. And I wanted to end and just touch a little bit on security, because security, oh gosh, it's such an underrated or under-discussed topic in this space. We talk a lot about data security, but when we start talking about voice and collaboration, security tends to not be at the forefront. And we really, at Metrigy, myself and my colleagues, are kind of on a mission to really continue to talk about security. And quite frankly, only 37% of businesses, and this is from the survey we did earlier this year, really have a proactive security strategy. And so it really leaves companies vulnerable to a lot of different attacks as companies can come in through the collaboration apps and the voice apps that that you're implementing today. And so I'm just going to end on this, and just a little bit more on the security side, just to think about it. Only 32% of businesses are actually actively monitoring or planning to monitor their team collaboration channels, right? So that's a big point of vulnerability. Only 14 or 15% have shared that they've had a collaboration security incident, which is up 2 times from when we asked that back, a couple years ago. But that's still, I think it's very underreported. I suspect there is quite a bit more. It's just that businesses aren't reporting that. And less than 50% are actually saying that an end-to-end encryption is a must-have feature. And so that's, there's lots of gaps and lots of holes on the security side for what people are thinking about. And particularly as we're working with multiple vendors and we're doing things on-prem and we're moving to the cloud, there's lots of vulnerability there, and companies just, it's not top of mind, clearly. So I've set up a few things. And at this point, John, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'm going to go on mute for a few minutes.
All right. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. And as Eric said, my name's John Shelby, Vice President of Business Development for Continuant. And just at a high level on kind of who we are. We've been in business for 27 years, and for those 27 years, most of them kind of 2 primary core businesses. One is managing and maintaining PBX and UC systems, and the other one is as a Microsoft partner, and specifically focused within the Microsoft Teams calling and meeting stack. We were a global partner of the year for Teams calling and meetings. To date, we've serviced about 5 million users across 70 countries, about 5,000 locations. About 25% of the Fortune 500 are currently under support with Continuant, with either from a legacy PBX UC perspective to Teams or both. Kind of touching on a couple things in particular, and starting off with kind of talking through that kind of hybrid, the factors related to an on-prem cloud hybrid solution, and really what we're seeing within the enterprise space on what customers are telling us, kind of what are the factors that make them drive toward keeping at least some element of an on-prem PBX. The ongoing ROI is certainly a factor in that. We have a number of customers we're working with that really have PBX UC systems that are not that aged, but are really have a desire to make a move toward a cloud solution at the same time, trying to get their investment out of that cloud PBX, looking for areas and specifics in which case they can leverage that where they need to, but still make a move toward the cloud. Some of them have integrations that haven't aged well, so maybe it's third-party applications, different CRM, whatever it may be, that are integrated into their PBX. But the fact is what they're integrated to is sold. It really doesn't even play in the cloud space. And then probably the biggest factor is just some misconceptions about what cloud calling looks like. There's an idea or a concept that in some cases they're aged, but cloud can be expensive. Cloud is not as reliable, doesn't have the availability that on-premise PBX has. It can be easier, more cost-effective. And so a lot of the conversations we have with customers, whether looking to look to a cloud hybrid solution or a pure cloud solution, is about addressing some of those misconceptions, and particularly how, with our properly built cloud infrastructure, we really have a more reliable and a higher availability solution than you can really even duplicate with on-prem. So a big driver from that perspective on those solutions. And then kind of specific to us and Continuant, and kind of one of the niches we fill is really taking customers that are in kind of with an on-prem PBX kind of in a cycle of dependence with the OEMs, and particularly, kind of as Diane discussed, there's kind of question marks around some of the major OEM players in the PBX space, and can a customer really afford to stay on a cycle of having to update and upgrade and so forth, while they're also working toward a migration to the cloud. With Continuum, really giving the ability to kind of put a stop to that cycle. Take the system as it is, it's working, it functions, it's going to run for years, we can manage it, we can maintain it. There's no pressure to upgrade, full 24/7 support, and it gives customers then the ability to put their focus and attention and financial support behind a move to the cloud and a move to the next generation of systems. And then kind of wanted to touch on a customer kind of specifically in this case. Coke, excuse me, second largest privately held company in the United States. We support currently about 100 Avaya and Cisco systems for them around the world. But they've already also moved about 30,000 users to Teams. And interestingly, with their continued aggressive move toward Teams calling, there is still a requirement for some on-prem based on some very specific requirements that Coke has. So they are, for the foreseeable future, going to stay in that hybrid mode, where they will have a small on-prem footprint, but again, most users moving on to Teams. And then kind of a lot of customers are looking at it saying, oh, what does that look like from a roadmap perspective? And breaking it down into the different pieces of what does the managed maintenance look like, and how do we manage the existing, keep it running 24/7, the best tier 3 teams out there. How do we integrate as we're looking to move toward a hybrid solution, right? So what does that integration look like? What are the phases of that integration look like? Building customized solutions, and then finally looking at that technology transition, doing the custom configuration, and clear roadmap strategies, iterative processes around how to get from where they are to where they want to go, and make sure the end is successful.
John, I have a question for you. When we think about this roadmap and we think about the Coke example that you gave, where would you put them in terms of what you guys are working on with them in this, in this kind of continuum?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And interesting, I think this is the case with a lot of in the large enterprise segment, is they really still kind of span the whole area, right? So still a pretty good sized on-prem PBX piece that's in the managed maintenance piece. There's a constant iterative process around integrations. The solutions are kind of in a little bit of an evolution and change frequently. And again, they're in a kind of a perpetual transition as they continue to move and move and move. Again, it's a organization with 100,000 or so users. It takes time, and there's consistent changes along the way.
Yeah, so it's actually helping them manage, but also helping them move forward, right?
Yeah, exactly. I kind of just wanted to touch on, Diane mentioned the different kind of ways to deliver Microsoft Teams calling, and from direct routing to Operator Connect, Microsoft calling plans. One of the things that we really looked to do was leverage a solution that took into account the 25 plus years of experience around what customers are looking for in enterprise telephony, and make sure that we could align our Microsoft Teams calling solution to be able to meet those requirements from whether we're talking about reliability or availability, feature perspectives, feature parity with a PBX solution, and the flexibility to be able to bring in additional applications and elements and integrations into a solution that is Microsoft Teams calling based. So we've built a geo-redundant global network with redundant, high availability, redundant NOCs and geo-redundant NOCs. So we have not only high availability within each data center, but full geo failover between data centers if there's any sort of outage. So really kind of built a resiliency and availability that's, again, very difficult to duplicate from an on-premise footprint perspective, with full carrier-grade infrastructure, and importantly, the security analytics and fraud tools around it. One of the things that's critical about the functions of direct routing in the Microsoft Teams space is our flexibility and ability to bring in additional segments. And it particularly applies to customers looking in the hybrid environment, as we're able to plug in, whether it's complex contact center applications from, say, a Genesys or NICE or what have you, or recording solutions or SMS solutions. We can bring those in and not only bring them in as part of a team solution, but still integrated into the legacy. So it allows a customer who has, from part of their migration perspective, maybe there's a need to get contact center moved first. We can do that and still have it as part of the solution. If they just need to add some SMS requirements for a subset of users, if they need to look at recording, again, we can bring those integrations through, integrate the legacy PBX into the solution, and wrap it all up together. And then kind of want to touch on another customer. This is one large Avaya 2 Teams migration over 3 years ago. So one team was still relatively new, but adding sort of the global automotive manufacturing company with about 20,000 Teams users in 50 countries. There was a number of drivers for them, and one of the biggest in their case was a cost-saving function. That moved to Teams, saved them $3 million a year. So what we frequently see is that when you look at what the ROI looks like and the total cost around it, Teams can be an extremely cost-effective migration for a large enterprise, particularly a global large enterprise, and particularly compared to some of the on-premise PBX OEMs that are out there.
Are they still using the Avaya system in part, or did they completely migrate over to Teams?
It's a good question. And it was a complete migration.
It was yep.
Yeah, so 20,000 users in 6 months, and a rather quick migration, I might say too. But wanted to diagram out a little bit of what does hybrid calling really look like, and really it all boils down to our core Continuum Connect platform, right? So the cloud-based platform integrates PSTN connections into Teams for your direct routing access. But again, going back to what I was saying a minute ago about our flexibility, we're able to, along with the different applications and third-party pieces that we can integrate into Teams or PBX, we can certainly connect to that PBX and give customers that are going to maintain some element of their legacy system really seamless connectivity between the PBX and Teams, users that are on both, users that are on one or the other. We can leverage their existing carrier relationships. If they're in a longer-term carrier relationship, we can bring that carrier into the solution and still give them their Teams calling capabilities, enable fully 911, and then kind of look to update everything along the way.
And in that scenario, are you managing the SBC for the customer?
We are.
Yep.
Yes, for sure. And in a lot of cases, it's an SBC that may not be there long-term either. So we're really working out things where you're not needing to make an investment in SBC that is only there to integrate your legacy, right? We can leverage that, whether it's through a rental, a borrow, what have you, but not having to make an investment in an on-premise SBC that may not last that long. Right. And then the last one's here, another case study I want to talk through, really from a hybrid perspective. ParkCell moved about 16,000 users off their Cisco toward Teams, saw incredible increase in overall productivity from their ability to really look at a full collaboration stack within one platform, within the Teams platform. Good cost savings moving from a Cisco solution to Teams. At the same time, they have maintained an element of Teams that they use within their space. They're in the pharmaceutical industry, lots of integrations in place with other pharmaceutical businesses. They needed to maintain Cisco to be able to maintain some of those integrations. We integrate the two together. It's a seamless communication platform for the customer. But again, they're still in that hybrid mode. It will be for the foreseeable future.
So in this scenario, they've moved quite a few, 16,000 to Teams calling, but there's others that will continue to reside on the Cisco calling for calling.
There's a few hundred still on the Cisco.
Yeah. Yep. And so it sounds like you said they will maintain that for the foreseeable future.
And in their case, it's kind of a good use case too, Diana, in that it's kind of a special case. Most of those people that are still using the Cisco phone are actually on Teams, but because of partnerships they have with another large pharmaceutical company, they needed to kind of maintain that piece of connectivity. And they're able to do that, but again, still able to be fully meshed in the current collaboration stack within their own organization.
And did you guys help do that migration for them? Because obviously that's not, that's not a plug and play, right? To be able to fully mesh that environment into Teams.
No, yeah, full turnkey migration from our perspective. And really, we follow a pretty stringent design, deploy, manage methodology. As a customer, we spend a good amount of time with going through the design elements. They're in about 40 countries. There's some different categories we have to jump through. And everything, all countries ranging obviously from the US and Europe, but including some difficult places like China, ones that have interesting regulatory requirements like India, Brazil, et cetera. So a full global deployment. And for what's worth, it was both the Teams calling and meetings migration. There was also about 200 meeting rooms involved.
And did they update their room systems too, or no? They did.
Yep.
And how long does a deployment like that? Because obviously that's a lot, right? Especially when you're talking about multiple countries across multiple regions. I mean, is this a multi-year kind of project, or is this something that can be done quicker than that?
Yeah, I think everybody wanted it to be done a little quicker. It was about a year, and everybody wanted it to be done a little quicker, but it was also in spanning 2021, 2022, so there was some logistical equipment delivery challenges.
Thanks very much, Diane. Thanks, John. We've got quite a few questions here. We've got a good amount of time to answer them. So first question that I want to pose came in from an audience member in the case of ParaXL. How was the increase in productivity measured? And I guess what are people doing differently to get more productive as they made this change?
Yeah, and I don't have a lot of details on that, right? So it was not a study that we did. It was a study they did internally and then kind of shared the information with us. And it was based primarily off of their ability to go kind of seamlessly from chat to call to meeting, et cetera. And they considered, a fairly significant savings within that. There was also their meeting environment. Because of that change, there was an increase in productivity in that they were able to more seamlessly use meeting rooms, meeting devices, meetings within the desktop range. So there's a number of factors, and I don't have a lot of specifics on it, but I know it was an internal study they completed.
Dan, I know Metrigy's done a lot of work on productivity as you move to more collaborative apps. Do you have anything you can share on that?
Well, we ask, right? I mean, in a lot of our surveys, and one, that we do, we ask what, if you're, so, it's hard. Every business measures productivity in a different way, right? So clearly this was an example of, a company giving, how much they had saved in productivity. And we ask the same questions, right? If you're using this tool, how has your employee productivity increased? And often it is because of some seamlessness, with a single tool. It's actually, it can shorten up collaboration times, right? If I have, maybe you didn't have like messaging, right? Or that team collaboration element, right? Where you can be in a room and you can be working on things and instead of doing emails or getting into a meeting, right? So everyone measures productivity in different ways, but often it's just better access to tools and that the whole company is using those tools. So, but that was pretty impressive savings, right? I would say 40% is at the high end that I've seen, right? We tend to see when people are moving to some of these tools, they talk about 20%, productivity gains.
When you talk about some of these cases, John, and the cost savings, where does that cost savings come from? This person is asking, is it maintenance, inventory, trunking? And they're adding, their experience has been that the cost of cloud is more expensive.
Yeah, I think so. Specific to Adient, their cost savings were, frankly, they had a hosted solution from Avaya, and it was largely a reduction from that cost comparison. What we're seeing, the tricky thing that we say we're working through with customers is there's a lot of factors that go into cost and kind of from what the current platform costs are, right? So from licensing to maintenance to upgrades to the PBXand replacement. And the other thing that has become a driver, so I would say a couple of years ago, I think cloud probably was generally more expensive in a lot of cases. However, the costs have continued to go down significantly. Whereas if you looked, again, just maybe 2-3 years ago, Microsoft calling plan was $12 per user. Our solution, a lot of the other solutions were down into the $3 to $350 a user range. Microsoft licensing has gone from pushing $8 a user for their phone system license down into the $4 range. So the prices have certainly gone down over the last couple of years. From a platform perspective, PBXand costs have gotten reduced. In a lot of cases, those reductions come about because customers are realizing their PBXand requirements are going to be significantly reduced on the new platform. Whereas, say on a legacy PBX, you were typically seeing a trunk station ratio of about 1 to 10. More often than not on this, because of the way Teams is leveraging more in-band calling, we're looking at trunk ratios that are more in the 1 to 15 to 1 to 20 range. So there's a number of different factors involved in kind of the cost piece, and generally it is come down to save customers money in most cases.
Yeah, I can also give a little bit of perspective, right? Because I mean, we see it that sometimes it isn't a cost savings, but there's that perception that if I'm already on a Teams license and I'm already using Teams, or the same could be said with other folks, not just Microsoft, right? Maybe I'm using Google or Zoom or Cisco or whatever for my collaboration pieces, right? My meetings and all my messaging, right? My team messaging, and now I want to add voice. That maybe I can now eliminate the maintenance and the management and all of those other associated costs, maybe not a direct cost, but associated costs with running a PBX, right? Or a second telephony platform, and then also collapse, going onto a single trunk, right? So a trunking contract, right? So all my voice contracts can be the same. So I mean, it really, it really can vary, right? And then some companies I know have multiple platforms, right? And we showed some of these examples, but not even on the calling side, right? Maybe they have multiple meeting platforms or collaboration platforms, and as they start to reduce them and get everyone onto a single platform, just there is the cost savings, right?
First question on, sorry, I forget which of the case studies. One of the benefits mentioned was that they were able to update obsolete endpoints, and I assume that's another way of saying telephones. Does this play into companies' desires to migrate? Just the fact that there's people just are not interested in using desk phones anymore. And does the endpoint factor play in much in all this?
Yeah, so it certainly does. Yeah, so in most of the migrations that we are doing, 80%, 80+% of the phone endpoints are getting replaced or removed, right? And people are moving to more personal devices, from headsets to pucks, etc. A big part of that development is around adoption change management and developing the different persona types within the cases. And a lot of the efficiency for a lot of these customers is kind of goes through ensuring that you get the right endpoint device. Again, in most cases, it's not a phone, right? It's a headset, it's a puck, it's a video solution, whatever it might be. But it really picks up a lot of efficiency. The costs are a lot lower for, typically speaking, for headsets than they are for phones. So there's reduction in expenses there as well.
Yeah, I mean, it is challenging if you have legacy devices and you still want to maintain phones, right? You know, the black box on the desktop, and you are migrating. Then yeah, that is an investment that has to be made. But what we're finding is that more and more employees are absolutely comfortable with using applications, right? I mean, they were forced to, right? when everyone had to work from home, and maybe they were resistant before. I mean, is there still a place for desk phones? Absolutely. But I think more and more employees have come to realize that that they can do everything they did and not have that extra device. So that is a cost savings there if they can eliminate them and not worry about the legacy ones.
John, what requirements kept Coke from going all in on Teams and instead keeping some prem, and specifically about Coke, but then also generalizing what else might be at play there?
Yeah, I can't talk very specifically on that one about Coke, other than to say there was security requirements around a user community or user group that did not have access to the outside world other than PSTN. And those are kind of the things that we see pop up occasionally, right? Where you've got a group that for one reason or another, say for example, is not allowed internet to the outside world, right? For different security measures, whatever the case might be. So there's still those requirements sometimes that drive on-prem requirements. Yeah, that was certainly the case for Coke.
Diane, is there, when you see enterprises looking to a hybrid scenario, are there certain commonalities that you tend to see there?
Yes, of course, right. There is, every business is a little different, right? And everyone has some unique requirements, especially as you move up market, right? So larger enterprises, but, definitely around verticals and things like that, there are.
And I would add too, real quick, Eric, one of the things we're seeing that's interesting in the hybrid space is more of a, sometimes it's selectively choosing an element of the business or a department, et cetera, that needs to stay on-prem. Other times it's more looking at a specific use case for a part that needs to go to, say for example, the Teams calling. We're seeing a growth, for example, in the healthcare space where the EMS systems that healthcare providers use are becoming more mobile, and they're wanting the telephony to become mobile with it. So we can do a lot of things where you load Epic EMS system on an Android or iOS device. We can put the Teams application on there and really free up, particularly some mission critical frontline people, to be able to be more mobile in everything they do. Enabling both their day-to-day Epic integration that they need to use to do their work along with telephony.
Well, you bring up healthcare, and we do have a question from the audience. When you think of healthcare, a lot of times you do think of the kind of the type of regulatory requirements and the greater concern over privacy. Has that affected the migration significantly?
No, I think it makes it stronger. A lot of the pieces around maybe what's been hesitant, and typically, we maintain this for hundreds of hospitals around the country, the legacy systems, and they have been slower to adopt Teams, for example. But I think that's generally true of healthcare. They're not early adopters for most technologies. But again, one of the things we're starting to see is some specific use cases where they can really leverage a cloud Teams calling solution to really benefit that patient experience. And like I said, the mobile app using Epic Rover with Teams calling we've seen a lot of movement recently.
Yeah, and I would say, even just beyond Teams, right? When we just think about UCaaS, or calling from the cloud, right? Moving that PBX functionality to the cloud, whether it be Teams or another platform, a lot of the providers now are HIPAA compliant, right? So, I mean, if you are in the healthcare space and you're looking to move, you can do an audit of any of these companies, and a lot of them have, are fully compliant for a lot of different things, right? And so there's that piece, right? But we are seeing, I am aware of a few fairly significant hospitals in North America who have already started that migration. I don't know if I can't remember off the top of my head if they're teams, but absolutely moving to a full UCaaS-based solution. If you go into any hospital or medical facility today, I mean, they're all, the nurses and the doctors, they're all walking around with laptops. They're all communicating. They're potentially talking to specialists that are not maybe right in the same building as themselves, or maybe even in the same state. I know. So 100% they're being utilized, and not even from patient to doctor, but from doctor to doctor, right? Particularly as specialists are becoming more and more remote and maybe not within a given care center.
We have a question now. When we're talking about cloud, are we talking about public cloud, private cloud? Are you seeing much implementation of kind of private cloud services, or that private cloud is a transitional step? John, is that something customers ask for much?
It is a little, yeah, particularly in some cases, and kind of there's two different ways to look at that, right? So Teams phone system is a public cloud solution, kind of no matter which way you slice it. One of the things we've done within our platform is have both kind of a shared tenant public cloud solution, as well as we build it out for some customers as a private cloud solution. So from the direct routing backbone piece, that can be either, but Teams is a public cloud solution.
Yeah, and I would say, just let me, gosh, the term cloud is such a has a lot of issues with just the name, right? And what we think about it is, to us, it's a multi-tenant kind of public. Where do the servers sit, right? And Teams is, like, as John mentioned, it is a public cloud. An option would be taking a dedicated system, right? So taking not an instance of Teams, you couldn't do it with Teams, but you might be able to do it with some of the traditional on-prem PBXs, right? So definitely Avaya and Cisco. And you name it, Mitel, you can put those instances and they can be dedicated, right? And so to me, it's not necessarily whether it be in a private cloud or a public cloud, but am I having shared infrastructure, right? Are those, is it multi-tenant or is it single tenant? But it's still managed in a cloud environment. But that cloud could still be a public cloud, right? I could still be putting those instances maybe in, Microsoft Azure or, AWS, and that would still be a public cloud, but those are private instances that are, meant for me. And I know we see that for companies who maybe want to take that transition, right? They still like the comfort and the feel of everything they get with that PBX, but they want to put that into a cloud and let someone else, a third party, manage that. So we do see that, and sometimes it's also for security reasons, right? So we see a lot of government instances of that, in the financial community and the likes.
One question that as you look at those specific case studies, John, you presented, and maybe just kind of looking at enterprises generally, it seems like one of the things we've been hearing lately is kind of just the roster of people who are proficient at running PBXs and want those kind of jobs that enterprises have kind of lost that skill set to a certain extent. Is that something that enterprises are they're kind of looking to make this transition because they don't have the expertise in-house anymore?
Well, yeah, I think that can be a factor for sure. In some cases, looking to, I think there's some enterprises that approach this thinking, hey, I've got this team that manages, say, for example, manages the collaboration platform, let's say Teams, for example. And I can eliminate my telecom people and just give it all to them. I think some of that is a misconception because over and over we see the people that are managing collaboration, SharePoint, et cetera, don't necessarily know enough about phones, even Teams phone, to really be able to manage it effectively. But I think you're making a good point, Eric, but I think there needs to be some caution around that. At the end of the day, Teams phone system is still a phone system, and it still has some of the phone system kind of idiosyncrasies that somebody coming from a different, from a collaboration platform or what have you, isn't necessarily going to pick up really fast.
They're asking about kind of the numbers that you showed, whether how that might break down on business size, if you have that.
Yeah, we do our research, and we do have it broken down by size of business. I mean, I see the question that you're referring to, and it would just depend on specifically what she was or this person was asking. So maybe that person could reach out to me directly, and maybe I can help her. But we do all of our data. We do span all the way from small to very large enterprises in our studies, and we do segment the data that way. I just did not show it.
And then, John, obviously the case studies you showed were some large enterprises. Has the more medium size and even smaller, did they also kind of just do that during the pandemic and it's done, or?
Yeah, I think some of the same, and I think even in the more medium-sized enterprise space, so we're generally in the 1,000 to 2,000 user and up space is kind of where we operate. But even down in that more mid-sized space, we've seen everything from kind of full migrations to some hybrid solutions. And for example, particularly in say higher ed, we've done a number of hybrid integrations because they have a very large analog footprint, and they, rather than reinvesting in analog gateways for a team solution, they kept their Avaya system essentially as a large analog gateway. So there's even things like that we see from a hybrid solution, more in that mid-sized space that can make a lot of sense from a user perspective.
And then I wanted to touch on, Diane mentioned that Metrigy is sort of out there sort of advocating for greater attention to be paid to the whole set of issues around security, and only 37% survey respondents had a proactive security strategy. And I wonder, maybe starting with John, what's your reaction to kind of the number that Diane showed, and is that your perception also that, what's the level of importance that as you're doing one of these migrations, you typically see placed on security?
Yeah, I'm not surprised to see the numbers that Diane showed based on conversations that we've had.
Is that sort of traditional PBX security, or things centered around like toll fraud or some denial of service? When you have these conversations, that's sort of the level of the topics that come up?
Yeah, so I mean, toll fraud and denial of service are pretty standard topics. Where I don't think there's a lot of security maturity, if you will, within a lot of the customers that we're talking to, is more around voice encryption, and certainly from an overall team's perspective, kind of that collaboration security that I think Diane was talking about. There's a lot of organizations that, to varying degree, teams is kind of the wild, wild west. Just whatever happens in that space just happens.
I want to give each of you an opportunity, if you have any kind of closing thoughts or anything to kind of leave the audience with.
No, just thank you all. Appreciate your time and attendance.
Yeah, I would just say that, obviously every company's journey is a little bit different. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? It doesn't have to be all on-prem or all to the UCaaS. And definitely to seek out advice and to help where necessary, right? I mean, companies like Continuant are just excellent examples of firms that can actually help you down that path, right? Because every company, especially as you move up market, right? And we're talking about larger enterprises and some unique requirements. It definitely, it definitely helps to have someone to help guide you through that process.
Well, it's a great thing to close on. I want to thank both of you for your time, Diane and John, and thanks to Continuant for sponsoring the webinar.